This is part 2 of my review for the FalconEyes S30, a 300-watt COB video light that's $400 less than the competition, yet still very professional. Last time we took a first look at what's included, the build quality and design. Today we're going to power it up, check out how to operate it from the control box and also the mobile app. We'll take some light output readings, we'll check the light spread with some different modifiers, we'll listen to fan noise and more. So let's get into it. Hey, what's up? I'm Scott and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing for more no-nonsense tutorials and reviews. Alright, so jumping right in, let's get some basic specs up here on screen while I talk through this timeline for today's video. First, we'll power this on and look at the onboard controls and menus. After that, we'll go through a few quick tests for light output with the Taconic C800 and fan noise, and then we'll finish it up with a run through of the mobile app, which is pretty simple but very easy to use. Okay, so let's get this turned on. All right, and powered down. There we go. This is 1%. That should be more than enough. Now the power button is a simple power on and power off, but even when you power this off on here, the fans in this control box do stay on, and judging based on the display on a VMont battery when I was checking this, it went from about 70% to 35% power within 9 hours with the light powered off. For me, this is a huge problem because if I have it plugged in the studio here semi-permanently, I have to actually unplug this control box every time I finish up, or it will just be sucking at my electricity. So FalconEyes, if you're watching, I hope that there's a firmware update or something that you can release for this, where the power button on here will completely turn off this control box as well, so that way it really doesn't draw any power, even if you have it continuously plugged in, or if you leave a VMont battery on there. Now there's also this Chinese/English button, and the benefit of this is that, of course, if it's accidentally set in the wrong language, you don't have to dive deep in the menu to find out where you change it. Well, it's all still in a foreign language, but this is the first time that I've seen a fully dedicated button to something like this, and it kind of caught me by surprise. The menu button will of course open the menu, but then it won't close it. It will go back if you jumped into a sub menu for a scene mode, for example. It will go back to the main menu. If you want to get out of the menu completely and back into your standard home screen for regular CCT mode, you have to actually select CCT mode. I would personally like the menu button to open and then again close the menu and just retain whatever settings you had set before you open the menu. But this is just me being picky. Anyway, the menu is pretty simple. You can scroll through here with your scroll wheel, and you have your CCT mode, you have scene mode, which is pretty simple. You have 9 special effects built into here, 9 scenes, and it does have speed and intensity control. Then you have your channel and fan settings, which we'll come back to in a second. You have Bluetooth reset if you're having problems connecting to the app, as well as your ID, which you can use to identify this light in the app when you're going to get connected. Back in the channel and fan sub menu, you can jump between the different choices using the scroll wheel, and then you'll click enter to jump into the options for that setting. Fan off will turn off the fans in the light, which you can probably hear the difference now. Let me turn that on and off again. Keep in mind there are other lights in this room that have fans in them as well, which are not quite as close to the microphone. This option will not turn off the fan that's in the control box, which is essentially silent anyway, and we will discuss overheating in relation to this setting, as well as take some more careful tests of the fan noise in just a second. Since the light's only at 1% power, we'll leave the fan off for the rest of this video. Now the enter button is used to select your setting, or if you're in the menu, you can select your CCT mode, for example. Pretty straightforward. The wheel, which is used to scroll through the menu, it does also click, but it doesn't let you select something in the menu, and it just kind of feels like it should since it's used to scroll through the menu. I mean, to me, that would just feel more natural. Whether you're in the menu or if you're on the main screen, clicking that wheel instead will change from fast, 10% adjustments in the intensity, to slow 1% adjustments, more fine adjustments. And you can see that change with this green icon on screen, S for slow and F for fast. Now that's definitely a nice feature for sure, and I've seen it on other FalconEyes lights as well, but it's not labeled on the wheel, so if you don't know about it, it's easy to miss. And personally, I think that the fast, slow adjustments should have been on this button, which is enter for whatever reason, and then that enter function should have been the click on the wheel. Then maybe they could have labeled the wheel with the word enter to make it easier to understand. Also, the adjustments here to intensity are a little bit laggy, which can feel mistakenly unresponsive at first. It's just a different feel from what I've experienced with other lights, where if you make a big jump, it doesn't follow in every percent on screen. It'll just adjust after you turn. And if you go slow, then it's a more accurate, representation of your movement of the wheel. Again, just a different feel, but it is something that you'll have to get used to a little bit if you're used to using different lights. Also, on the main screen here, the only thing that can be adjusted is your intensity. But if you turn the wheel while this little sun icon is selected, you won't change anything. You have to actually click enter to jump into that setting, just like in the menu, and then you can make adjustments. So it is an extra step, but it does also prevent accidental changes. So once you've got your intensity setting dialed in, click enter to kind of deselect that, and you again will avoid accidental changes by hitting the wheel there, which again is nice, but it's a little weird if you're not used to it. Now you can see that the color temperature is also displayed on screen here as a reminder, but it is not something that you can select or change with this particular light. And we'll see in the tests section later that this 5600K, which they display on screen, is pretty close to the actual output. Now, if we're going to be drawing a few comparisons to the Aputure 300D Mark II, at least in specs only, that also has some control over different dimming curves as well, which this does not. The menu here is really quite simple and minimal, which is probably okay for most people, but it is worth mentioning for those who need more that the Aputure 300D does feel like it has a little bit more of a detailed or refined menu system. So to go back and talk about the fan a little more, in the menu, as we saw, you can turn that off. Those are the fans in the light, and that will cause two things to happen. One, I'm going to turn this light to the background for a second so that way it doesn't blind the camera. And let's turn the fan back on to show you this. So the first thing that will happen is we'll actually decrease the output of the light, capping it at 50% power. So that brings it from about 60,000 lux that I measured at 1 meter to about 30,000 lux, just about 50%. If you have the light set at or under 50%, turning the fan off, of course, has no effect, but anything over that, and you'll see that the light drops down to 50%, which is also reflected on the main screen. If you can see here, it was at 100%, now it shows up at 50%. Now, even then at 50%, it will shut down if it overheats, which it does seem to do at about 70 degrees, which is displayed on screen here. Now, how long that will take seemed to depend on a handful of different variables, but when it happened to me, it had been about a half an hour at room temperature, and the light recovered within just a few minutes of turning the fans back on, and at that time it displayed about 55 degrees when it turned back on. Also, I've never had an issue with it overheating when the fans were turned on, again, at least at room temperature. It did get up to be a bit over 60 degrees after it was at 100% for a few hours, more than a few hours, but with that fan on, I personally have never experienced it overheating and shutting down. A low speed fan setting would be great to have in here as well, just to kind of balance things out between noise and overheating, but for now, let's take a quick listen to the sound of the fans in the light compared to the control box, and then see how these fans would sound on my microphone when the light is a couple of meters away in a softbox and using it as a key light at a reasonable distance. So right now we've got the S30 in the Aputure Light Dome Mark II, and the surface of the Light Dome Mark II is just over a meter away from me, so the light itself is a little bit further back. Of course, my microphone is right here, so we'll check the fan noise as well. With this distance, both the control box and the light itself I'll measure and put up on screen exactly how far away they are, but obviously off axis from the microphone, like you would typically have in this type of setup. Now the light is only at 10%, so at this distance, even in a softbox, this has more than enough power. So at 10%, we also could then turn off the fan and it would not affect our exposure at all. So we will go ahead and also test this without the fan. Of course, you'll be in very different situations from me, different soft boxes, different distances from the light, different other lights that you're mixing with ambient or not. So I'm not going to bother showing you a whole bunch of different exposures and setups here, but you can see again at 10%, this is the exposure that I get at this distance with the light domed surface just over a meter away from me. I'm now going to pump it up to 50%, which is the max that you can go to with the fan off, and I'll show you how overexposed this becomes, and then I'll boost it up to 100% just so you can see really how incredibly bright this is. This is at 50% and it's already very bright. At 100%, this is totally gone. Obviously, 100% is going to be best for bouncing the light using like a book light or any other kind of reflected light, or shooting it through quite a lot of diffusion or from a further distance away. But you can see here again, you don't need this much power in this type of situation. So this is now with the Aputure 120D Mark II in the same position at the same distance, and the power is now at 65% to get the same basic exposure as we saw with 10% on the S30. So for now, let's just take a listen at this distance to the fan noise in the Aputure 120D from my microphone right here. The Aputure 120D has two fan modes. One is to force the fan, and two is auto mode. So there's no full off mode. So even if you turn it into auto, it will stay off until it needs to, and then it will kick in. So that's going to depend on your intensity. It's going to depend on the ambient temperature of where you are, but there is no purely off mode. So again, obviously this is not the 300D, this is the 120D, so the exposure is not meant to equal the S30, but we'll just see how much overexposed this can reach when we push it up a little bit more, 35% more to 100% full power. Again, just so that way if you've used this or if you have this, you can have some basis for comparison in this type of setup. Okay, and so this is now at 100%, and just looking at it, just judging based on memory, it's probably pretty close to what we had at, I guess, 50%, or maybe if it was a little bit lower than that on the S30. But again, 100% Aputure 120D, same distance. The surface of the light dome is just over a meter away from me. I don't have a huge space here, but from at least a close distance, I'll show you on a solid gray backdrop a little bit of what you can see in terms of the light spread with the light itself, just the bare light, and also with the reflectors that are included. This is not necessarily to judge for brightness. We want to take a look at the hot spots here, or the spread of light, things like that. And then I'll throw up on screen some results from the Falconic C800 color meter to tell you things, of course, like CRI, SSI, all that good stuff, but also so you can see in numbers, in lux, how the brightness of the 120D Mark II compares to the S30 by itself with a reflector and in a softbox, and also how it compares to the Aputure 300D Mark II, at least on paper. So since I'm not sure if this mic in this position even picked up the noise from the fan in either of these lights, we're going to go ahead and point it at the fans at a closer distance, just so you can hear side by side the fans, and again the Aputure 120D, which I have here on me, compared to the S30. And also within the S30, we'll show you how the fans in the light compare to the fans in that control box. And I will also mention that the fans in the control box, or the single fan on the control box, is underneath. So when it's sitting on the floor, that noise is a bit more muted than when you have it free floating in the air using like the V-mount mount on the stand, for example. Not a huge difference because it is really quiet in either case, but let's go ahead and take a closer listen. So finally, let's take a look at the app. It's called Desal Light, and you can see I already have a few lights in here, so I am more or less familiar with this app already, and it is one of the better apps that I've used. Click the plus sign in the corner and add device, and you'll see your light right there. Again, the F489 is the number that we saw in the menu when we looked at the ID. So click plus there, and it will get added. Once you've got the check mark, you're good to go back to your main menu, and you can see it's in that list now with a green tab on the corner to indicate that it is powered on and connected. Now long push here to get a drop down menu where you can rename it. You could see some information about it or delete it from the list. You can also power it off and on right from here, and then simply tap it to jump into your controls. The settings on the app and the settings on the light won't necessarily be immediately synced, but as soon as you go and take control of it, you can see there that they do sync up pretty quickly, no problems whatsoever. Now, since this is just a daylight colored light, there's really not a whole lot that's in here that you can control. You've still got a power button in this control panel, as well as, of course, the simple slider to control your intensity. You can't tap the number here and then manually enter the number of the percent that you want in terms of intensity, but if you want finer control, you can then just tap the plus or the minus next to that slider and get that fine 1% control, which is a lot easier than having to really perfectly dial that in with the slider itself. Then of course you do get your standard tab for the scenes or the special effects with that speed control down here. So let's look at lightning, for example. And we've got the speed set at 0 right now. If we go all the way up to a speed of 5, it's going to be a bit faster, you can see there. And then of course you can dial in the intensity of that effect. But on this screen here, you can't see the intensity in a percent. It's just that slider, so the lowest intensity or the highest intensity, which of course is 100%. These are the same 9 special effects that are built into the light, and I would say my biggest disappointment with this screen here is just that you can't see that intensity in an actual percent number on the app. Of course, you can see it on the light itself, so if you want to double check, you can just check right there what percent you're at, but I think they should have the number in the app as well, of course. Then down the bottom, you do also have this music tab, which I've never really used. I don't have any music in iTunes to really test it with. It's not something that I would really use myself. Not going to waste your time talking about it, but you do also have the little arrow on the side where you can swipe over and then go through the different lights that you may or may not have in your setup to quickly jump back and forth between multiple lights that you want to control. So I think that's about it for this light. Now, I do have my frustrations with it here and there, but for about $400 cheaper than the comparable Aputure alternative, I think that it's a steal. If you want a stronger case, a more finished or polished feeling menu or controls layout, deeper controls in the menu, and a light that does fit into a whole fantastic ecosystem and has, that nice remote control, for example, you won't regret getting a 300D Mark II, of course. But the S30 right here will be all the light that most people need and even more. It's a fantastic professional feeling light with some minor design weirdness, not even really flaws. I'm personally very excited to continue using this on both photo and video shoots myself. It's going to be pretty much my go-to light in most situations. But if you have any questions or comments, as always, please leave them down below and I will do my best to get back to you. Otherwise, if you like this video or found it helpful, please do consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe to see more in the future, and as always, thank you for watching.